Can we get the plan text? Sure. And what do you mean in your plan text when you say incentivize? Like, what sort of incentives would you offer?
Well, it would be anything that's necessary to incentivize solar so that it's competitive with oil. If you want some examples of that, some examples might be things like tax cuts or subsidies.
Do any of your solvency cards talk about like a specific mechanism that would be most effective?
Our evidence actually indicates that there would be a particular kind of feed-in tax cut that would be a good way to incentivize solar energy, but anything that would be necessary could be used. If you want to read a disadvantage to any incentive for solar energy, you can go ahead and do it. We'll defend it.
Okay, so just broadly offer incentives.
Well, it would be specific incentives. It would be things like tax cuts or
Why
subsidies.
doesn't your plan text specify what incentives specifically you would use?
Well, the reason for that is actually because we don't think that the negative should be able to have incentives counterplans. If we specified a particular incentive, you could always just say, oh, here's another incentive that's slightly better. We think that that's probably bad for debate because what it does is essentially steals the entirety of the app office.
Isn't it the affirmative's burden to defend the most effective solvency evidence and do research about what is most effective?
Yeah, and we think that incentives are the most effective. The resolution asks us to increase alternative energy incentives, and that's precisely what we do.
Okay. Let's talk about your peak oil advantage. So you read a piece of evidence that says that the potential for solar to fuel the United States or the world is high enough to replace all of our fossil fuel consumption. What piece of evidence do you read that indicates that we currently have the capacity to collect and efficiently use that energy?
The solar energy?
Yes.
Sure. Our first piece of sheer evidence in the solvency contention is actually really good about this. It indicates that solar energy is really awesome. It's in the third generation, and it's becoming smaller and more efficient. The only problem is that there's things like fossil fuel lobbies who don't want solar energy to be implemented, clearly because it would trade off with all of their profits, so they're trying to block it. However, if we are able to incentivize it so that it's cost competitive for homeowners, then it would be very easily transitioned.
And you say that solar nanoparticles would be used. I heard in your card that it said that today's energy, the solar power that's being used currently isn't nanoparticles. What sort of solar energy is being, solar collecting is being used currently?
I'd like to make a little distinction here. There's first generation solar technology, which are, say, those huge solar panels that you might see on a house. Well, the plan might incentivize some of those so that we could get that kind of solar energy. There's also new kinds of solar energy, second and third generation. Some of those kinds of energy include nano-solar particles. An example of that is you can actually coat a car on the top with these nano-solar particles.
But you don't specify what sort of solar collection technologies you incentivize.
Right.
So the infrastructure that exists now would logically be expanded rather than new sort of...
Actually, our evidence indicates that nano-solar particles do exist now and that would be a kind of solar energy that would exist.
But that evidence actually talks about how this is sort of a cutting-edge technology that hasn't yet been adopted. Your own evidence...
Right, because there hasn't been enough research and development, which the plan would do.
Thank you. We don't need...